Hi, I'm Elaine Holden, and welcome to Education Matters here on Channel 96 in Nashua, New Hampshire. I appreciate you joining me today. As you can see by the items that I have on the table next to me, I'm going to be talking about music. And I'm going to try to be addressing various aspects of music. You know, we don't think too much about music as a topic unless you happen to be a musician or a singer, or if you perhaps enjoy going to concerts, a lot of people do, or singing perhaps in a choir at church. But really, music permeates our lives. From the very moment we are born, there's a rhythm to life. And if you look at little children, what do little children do? They're clapping their hands and they're following the rhythm of the world. They're following all different kinds of rhythms in their environment. And that's a very good thing. But as they get older and they go into school, parents expect that that music experience and exposure and education will continue. And if you're in a school district that really values music, that frequently does happen. And you can see some extraordinarily wonderful musical programs that are going on in various school districts around the state and certainly around the country. But then you have less affluent school districts. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now are cuts, not just in New Hampshire, but across the United States, cuts in what they call the specials being art and music and all of those wonderful areas where we try to expose our children as best we can to some of the beauty of life. And as I said, music permeates our life. It's so ingrained in us that even when we use it in language, music soothes the savage beast, and put a song in your heart. All of these phrases, and I'm sure you can think of dozens, all of these phrases really permeate our language because there's so much music embedded in our lives, in our world, in our cultures. And just about every culture in the world has some form of music. Now, it may be just the beating of drums, it may be flutes, it may be some kind of wind instrument, which is very common. It may be a stringed instrument. One of the things that we have seen in archaeology is that all of the ancient cultures have some type of a flute, whether it's literally a hollowed out bone with little holes stuck into it so that the fingers can cover those holes and make different tones, or whether you have something perhaps carved out of wood. I have my recorder right here. And this recorder is something I play a lot, and it's something that children frequently start out with. Now, I will tell you that when children start learning the recorder, it's probably about third or fourth grade. And they enjoy it because it's fast. They learn it quickly. And this gives them that sense of accomplishment. It gives them that sense of success. And that's important for children. They have an outlet for creativity. And that's also important. Now, why I say that is because last week I discussed chronic otitis media with effusion, if you happen to have caught that show. Basically, ear infections. And one of the things we know that's an after effect of those ear infections is an auditory processing deficit in one form or another for many children. So if they have gone to an audiologist and been diagnosed with an auditory processing deficit, frequently the recommendation, or one of the recommendations, is to have music lessons. And interestingly enough, it's actually been delineated as far as how long? 3 years. If you have 3 years of music lessons, you're more likely than not to have the opportunity to really rewire your brain, to be able to listen better, listen more carefully, get the subtleties and nuances of the sounds, of the tones, the highs and the lows. Follow the rhythm of the language. Now, I'm speaking to you in English, and I have a certain rhythm to my language. And if you're an English speaker, you understand me because you follow that same rhythmic pattern. Now, if somebody speaks to you in another language, they may pronounce the words in English. You know, if they're other language speakers and they've learned English, they may indeed pronounce the English words very accurately, but their rhythm, their intonation will be different because they are speaking with the intonation, with the rhythm of their cradle tongue, the language they were born into. And so we sometimes will say, well, that's an accent. It's really not an accent because they're pronouncing the words correctly, but the rhythm is different. Every language has its own rhythm. And many times children who have difficulties processing auditorily don't have the right rhythm. And so it sounds different when they are speaking. And the sad thing is that it's going to sound different when they're reading as well. Now, we know reading is my thing, and I'm very concerned if a child is having difficulty reading, especially if his or her rhythm is off. If they don't have that same prosody, that same intonation as other English speakers. So what do we recommend? Well, clearly we talk about things such as music lessons, because music attunes the child to rhythm, to that flow of the language, to that flow of the sounds, and whether it's sounds in music or sounds in language. And they make a good transition. So that's one of the important things that we have learned in research about why it's good for children to have music lessons. But it's not just for children with auditory processing deficits. For example, if you have a child who has a lack of strength in his or her fingers, sometimes children lose the strength or are not born with the strength and the same ability to manipulate the last two digits, the pinky finger and the ring finger, sometimes just the pinky finger. There's not a lot of strength there. They don't have a lot of what we call articulation in those digits, or in those phalanges. You can have a fancy word for it. So what happens? Well, you know what? They use the recorder. Yeah, and that's a really cool thing. So they are playing the recorder and they're using all of their fingers and they're stretching those fingers and pushing pressure. They're putting pressure on these little holes here, and they have to make the right sounds, and it's getting the hands to work with the ears, to work with the eyes, watching the music on the sheet, okay, on the paper. So all of these are important pieces. And this is a multi-sensory learning experience for children. But it's also an introduction to our culture, and the introduction, of course, can expand to other cultures. Now, when I first started talking here on Education Matters, I brought up Cinderella. And I talked about the 360 different Cinderella stories and the different cultures and the changes that have been made to the Cinderella stories based on those cultures. You can actually trace the migration of people by how different the Cinderella stories are for children. And, you know, it's interesting because you can also see the interaction of people by their musical instruments. Now, I happen to have a little Peruvian pipe here, and that's also a lot of fun. And on the back, of course, I have markings for the different notes. I'm not going to play it for you, don't worry. But this sort of Peruvian pipe, again, is a lovely way to introduce children, not just to music, but to a culture. The culture of Peru, the culture of a part of South America, the western part of South America. Why is that important? Well, in history, what do we know about Peru? We know about the Aztecs. We have learned about the different cultures, the interaction, the Spaniards that came over and conquered, Francisco Pizarro, all of the different things that have happened in South America, the history, all of the indigenous people in South America. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to children. It's certainly fascinating to adults. But music is a part of it. And that's the sort of thing where if we're really paying attention to the opportunities to introduce children to the music of different cultures, It's a nice introduction. It's a nice segue into learning, really learning about other cultures. And we want that for our children. We want that exposure. We want that experience. Now, as a Rotarian, I have to tell you that we have an opportunity for our teenagers to do an exchange. And this exchange is for a year. And children from the United States go to different countries, and they spend a year with host families. And children from other cultures, other countries, come to the United States, and they spend a year with host families. And they experience what it's like to live in America, as our children that are sent into other countries experience what it's like to live in that country. It builds friendships. It builds connections. It helps to make a world better and the opportunity for peace, because how can you fight with somebody? How can you go to war with somebody that you know, that you've lived with in a country that you have embraced for a year? And that's the sort of thing that we do in Rotary. A lot of organizations do that. A lot of people sponsor children interacting with other cultures. And not every child obviously can go to another country and spend a year. That's sort of a unique situation, certainly. But you can experience those cultures right here. And music helps you do that. Now, I will also say that it can be an extremely expensive venture if you are, in fact, showing children, large groups of children, a school full of children, a lot of opportunities in music. First of all, teachers are very uncomfortable about having children taken out of their classroom simply because they are so pressured to teach so much in really what is a very small amount of time. We have high stakes testing. We have teaching to the test. We have time taken out of instruction to test the children. We have so much going on with respect to academics that it's almost impossible to take out that extra time, to carve out those hours for art and for music, because we don't put the same value on art and on music as we do on other subjects. I'm not going to give you my opinion on it, but I'd like you to think about it. I'd like you to talk about it. Talk about it within the family. Talk about it to friends and neighbors. What's your opinion? What's your opinion on music and music education? Now, I will tell you that one of the important things for me is to actually have hands-on instruments. I showed you my recorder. This is not an expensive piece of equipment, if you will. This recorder is probably about $10. And you know what? You can get them for $3 or $4. You know, the plastic ones are really very inexpensive, and if you buy them in bulk, it's even cheaper. And they still make a pretty good sound. Now, I have, for example, my last trip to China. No, actually, that was my first trip to China. I have a sort of a flute that's made of a gourd. And this was made in the southwestern part of China. And I picked it up and I brought it home. It doesn't weigh very much. It slides right into my suitcase. And I was able to show this to my students. And I was able to say, you know, here's the place in the world where this was made. And this was a very good thing. And let's try it. Let's blow into it. Let's try to make music with this. This is a very old type of instrument. It's been around for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's kind of a segue into talking about southwestern China. You can do that with any culture. But that's an introduction to music that might be very difficult to do in a large classroom because we don't have a lot of music teachers. We don't have that same ratio. The teachers of music and the teachers of art usually have much larger classes simply because it's expensive. It's another expense that sometimes districts can't afford. So what do parents have as a choice? Well, parents may have the opportunity to find a way to get music lessons for their children. And now this is a problem, because if you've taken music lessons, I know I have since I think I was in the 3rd grade, I took piano lessons. My great Aunt Margaret and my father discussed it, and Aunt Margaret said, well, you know, Bertha, which is her daughter, learned to play on this piano, and Sylvia, who was the cousin, learned to play on the piano. We'll just have the piano moved over to your house and Elaine can start. And I did. So it was a conversation between great Aunt Margaret and my dad. And the piano got moved in and I started to take lessons. And I really didn't like to practice because it was sort of aside and apart from what was going on in my family. When my daughter, however, was quite young, we got involved in Suzuki violin. What does that mean? It means that I play the violin right along with her. It's part of the family culture. And this is a good thing because it's a very natural thing. You see mom playing the violin, you see dad playing the violin. I'm going to pick up my little violin and play as well, and we all play together. And then we listen to the tapes of the music that we are playing, that we are practicing. And that's a Suzuki method. And it works beautifully for a lot of children. It works because you have a family that has integrated it into their lifestyle. That's how you help a child really become conversant with music, really not resent practicing, because it's a part of a lifestyle that the entire family is engaged in. And I have to say that that's one of the benefits of that type of a musical education. Now, we also have kinder music for the little kiddos. We start them young. We start them when they are incredibly enthusiastic. They're in small groups, 2 or 3 or 4 kids, and they're making music. They may be pounding blocks together. They may be rattling tambourines. They may be pounding on drums. You never know what they're going to be doing, but they're going to be making some kind of music. What do we know about these kids that have started music lessons early and have continued on? We know that they have good auditory processing. We know their prosody is very good. We know that they have developed a discipline for practicing. They have developed a discipline for studies, because it does transition into other subject areas. And they have started to learn about, really good learning, by the way, about other cultures. And so it's all been of tremendous benefit to children. As I said, school districts that cannot afford this really have turned to something on a computer. So yes, children still have to have music education. We still have it on the books legally. I don't think we can eliminate it completely. But how we do this, how we introduce and how we get them through those required hours of music can have a wide variety of choices for a school district. And many times I see children on computers. They've never touched an instrument. They've never really seen an instrument in many instances. They are just simply doing things on a computer. Is that the same? I maintain it is not. I know it's probably too expensive for a school district to afford to buy everybody a recorder, even one that's a couple of bucks each, because money is tight. I understand that. I understand that sometimes it's also a hardship to pay for music lessons for children. So what's the choice? Well, parents can engage in music with their children. You don't have to pay for lessons if you are learning as well. So everybody gets a recorder, or everybody gets an instrument that is not very expensive. And everybody plays together, not as a duty, but as part of a way to enjoy another aspect of life. Because as I said, music permeates our lives. We don't think about it. We don't start just having conversations about music, but it does permeate our lives. And we listen to the radio. We listen to the radio in the car, perhaps, or CDs, or on our iPods, or on whatever device we happen to have. In the old days, it was a Walkman. And that's great. That's wonderful. but it's an isolating sort of activity if we're just doing it all by ourselves. The trick is to incorporate it in the family and not so much teach the children in a formal way, but have the children watch mom and dad play an instrument and then have the opportunity to have this instrument for themselves. And they play. And it's a very gentle, very sort of loving environment. And that's a good way to learn music, the very basics of music, learning to read the notes. And yeah, there are free places on the internet where you can download and print out sheet music where it shows you exactly where you're going to put your fingers on this recorder, and it shows you exactly how to follow the music, match up the music with the position of the fingers. It's doable. It's very doable. And it's something that a lot of parents engage in because sometimes it is expensive to pay for lessons for children. So it's something that you can incorporate within the family if it is not happening in your school. If it is happening, that's wonderful. But we as family, moms, dads, grandparents, should support this. It cannot just happen 1 or 2 hours a week. It should happen much more. So how do we do this? Well, we can certainly look for various places where there are instruments. There are some pretty nice museums around the area where we can visit and we can look at different instruments, old ones, very classical ones. I know that sometimes it's expensive to go into a museum, but if you go to your library, if you're a member of your library and you've signed up and it's for free, public library, if you go in and sign up and you have a library card, you have the option of getting tickets, free tickets to a museum. Now you have to reserve the tickets, but think about it. It doesn't cost you anything and you're getting into a museum like the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, for example, at no cost because you are a member of the library. And a lot of libraries in this country purchase these yearly tickets so that their patrons can indeed enjoy the benefits of beautiful, beautiful museums at no cost. And that's an important piece. Now, what do I do for music? Well, this is not, a friend gave me this actually. This is a harp. My harp is a lot bigger, but this is a harp. And it does take a long time to play, to learn to play it. But I will tell you that the harp is also a very old instrument. The harp is something where it has strings, and these stringed instruments are also a part of many, many cultures. So we have stringed instruments, we have wind instruments, we have certainly drumming type of instruments. All of that is an opportunity for children to experience music. And as I said, it's part of our life. It's part of who we are as not just a culture, but as a species. Because when you think about it, children hum, they babble. They are babbling with the same intonation and the same rhythm as parents are speaking. And so it's a natural thing for them to grasp the rhythm first, and then they start to grasp the individual words of the language. So rhythm is important. Prosody is important. And as I said, for those children who have auditory processing deficits, music is vital to help them develop neurologically, to be able to start to hear the high and low pitches, the movement of the language and the layers of the language. And all of that is really a wonderful thing because it makes them better students. It makes them better listeners. It allows them the opportunity to interact with many people. And it also, when you think about it, musicians are pretty interesting folks. And to become a musician really allows a child to say, hey, I play a musical instrument. And that's sort of a special thing, because not all kids do. All kids should, you understand, but not all kids do. What I'm hoping that every single person that is watching this show here on Channel 96 will sit back and think about it and say, you know what? I bet I could pick up an instrument. I could pick up a harp. I could pick up a recorder. I could pick up a flute. I could pick something up and I could start to play it. Find something simple. Find something that's going to give you reward pretty fast. And then say to a child, hey, you know what? This is fun. Let's do this together. And that's the sort of thing that allows children and parents to develop a closeness, a bond, yet another form of connection that will last, hopefully, through the lifespan. And I have to say that, you know, it's one of the exciting things for me when I see children, for example, at a recital, a music recital, and they've worked really hard all year long to learn pieces and to work their way through from pretty simple to very difficult. And they play it in front of an audience and they're poised. And they walk out on that stage and it's like they own the stage. Why? Well, certainly because they know what they're going to play. They've practiced it. They're confident and they'll stand in front, or they'll sit down if it's a piano or a cello. They will be in front of that audience and they will play at their very best, and they'll get applause and they'll get a lot of praise for it. They're going to feel very, very good about it. And that gives them the opportunity to be in front of people and to perform. And that performance gives them the confidence that maybe they need a lot. And these children, in fact, show more confidence in their lives in front of classes when they have to recite or they have to read or speak, because they have been in front of an audience, they have practiced. And so sometimes it draws out a child that is a little more shy. Sometimes it allows a child to gain success where he or she might not be successful in other areas. Music does a lot for children. We have to think about that when we're looking at how our schools provide music for our children. Do our schools actually expose our children to real instruments? Do our schools only put our children on computers? Do our children even have access to keyboards? Even if they're the electronic keyboards that we have, that we've seen that go right into a computer, it's still a keyboard. Do children have access to this? Do they have the opportunity to learn to play, to read music, to hear the highs and the lows, the authentic music, not the music created artificially by a computer or some other electronic device, but in fact the authentic music, whether it be something as simple as a recorder or panpipes? Do they have that authentic access? That's the questions you have to ask as a parent. And these are the important pieces that we as adults need to investigate when we are in fact examining what our children are getting for a curriculum in school. As I said, it's an important aspect of our lives. It's an important aspect of our children's lives. It's a piece of our culture that cannot be neglected or denied. And I strongly advise a more active involvement on the part of the citizenry to make sure that our children have that same lovely access to music that past generations have had in those schools that have put a value on this topic. And so I remain adamant about Education Matters here on Channel 96. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to being with you again next week. Goodbye.